Okay, welcome to our Camano Wildlife Habitat program, our July programs. Thank you for coming on this beautiful July evening and working on creating an island in harmony with nature, 1 yard at a time. And I can tell you today is a day that is fabulous to have a backyard wildlife habitat. I know my greenery and my layers with the trees and the shrubs and the ground cover is lush green and cooling when our neighbors are in dry grass. So it's nice to have a backyard wildlife habitat. So we do the project because we want to kind of restore some of all that gray and developed areas. And we can do that in our yards. If we think about areas, area 1 is kind of what's close to your house. Area 2 is more like walkways to get from maybe the garage to the house, and then the area 3 is like the back part of your property that maybe links up to neighbors. And by doing that, we can kind of join backyards and reestablish some corridors that link up to the parks and things on the island. So that's what our mission is, and we do that by, this is kind of what's happened in my yard. So when we moved to the island in November of 1994, there was a tree, and somebody may need to mute. There was a tree and there was a lawn. And so then in 2007, we had, slowly reestablished some kind of a forest type of thing on the left-hand side. And so we've got shore pines and salal and some sword ferns and various things on the left-hand side, but the right-hand side we didn't do much. And now on the right-hand side we have a lot of different things over there too. So when I went up this trail today on a hot sunny day and the beach was toasting, I was in nice cool lush green up here and in my wildlife habitat that is so lush and such that the critters have places to hide that sometimes I don't even know they're there. So in a backyard wildlife habitat, you have the food, water, shelter, and places to raise young. And so the food, the shelter, and the places to raise young all can be done with plants. And the water, sometimes the plants that you have collects water as well. So when you do things with plants in mind, native plants especially, then you're reestablishing the corridors and such that are on the island. And there's also other things to think about. So we're on the single source aquifer, so our water is limited. So reducing lawn makes it so that things can just grow. So with my yard now, I never have to water. It's just does its thing because it's all pretty much native plants with some ornamentals mixed in that are good for wildlife. And so water conservation is happening because the roots and such are doing that on their own, and I don't have to help them along anymore. And pesticide use and fertilizer use are things that on the application they ask if you're doing it or not. So you don't have to be a purist, but as you do more in your yard, you find you will be more thinking about what am I doing for the critters that I'm using that are coming to my wildlife habitat, so that we're making it a safer spot. And when we restore stuff in our yard and our neighbors do that, then it's going beyond one little yard, it gets into community. So on Camano, we are the 2nd community wildlife habitat in the state and the 10th in the nation. And there are now 148 in the nation and 18 in the state. So to certify as a wildlife habitat, it's pretty easy. It's a simple application through the National Wildlife Federation. You can find this application on our website. This is especially good if you live on Camano. If you go to the National Wildlife Federation website, you can go directly and certify your yard online. And so it's merely checking off how you're providing food. You need 3 different sources. It can be feeders or it can be plants. And then how you're providing water, shelter, and a place to raise young. And then the sustainable gardening technique. So you just have to do a few checkoffs, knowing that this is a work in progress, so you don't have to be a purist. So my backyard wildlife habitat kind of started out as that grass in the front part of our, before the top part of our slope before going down to the water. And then we just did pieces, to get rid of the grass. And so it's a work in progress, and as you go, you check off more things in the boxes. Not that you have to recertify or anything, it's just that you're kind of doing more because you're becoming more savvy about wildlife habitat. So once you're certified, and there's a $20 fee, and with that you get a paper certificate that says you're certified wildlife habitat, and then you also get their magazine National Wildlife for a year. And then if you want to continue and be a National Wildlife member, you can do that. Otherwise, you're certified for as long as you live on the property. And if you want to tell your neighbors, and then I get calls that say, you know, I'm a wildlife habitat, I can do that. So I get calls. It's great advertisement for us, and it's great. It kind of gives your more messy garden than a finely, ornate one. It gives it some purpose. So the signs are making your garden purposeful, and so you can do as you please for the wildlife. And this is our dots on the island. This is at about 700. We now have 1,012 certified wildlife habitats on the island. We are working on 1,100. So if you haven't certified or you have friends, now's a great time to do it. And I'd go to homeowners associations. I know the summer is a time where those are meeting. And so a week from Saturday, I'm going to go and give just a 10-minute little spiel about backyard wildlife habitats. So if you're interested in that, we can do that to let neighborhoods know more about it. We do have certified neighborhoods on the island as well. So these are the communities in Washington. So you can see that the National Wildlife Federation thinks of us as a bit of a regional wildlife habitat because so many communities are doing it. It's an action step. It's like we can't stop everything from being logged on the island, but we can do what we can in our yards and what our friends are doing and our acquaintances so that we can still restore habitat and we can still restore some corridors. So here's where you can get more information from the National Wildlife Habitat or from our website. And our website is great. Roxy has done a fabulous job with that, and you can go and watch our programs. We have one blockbuster hit about what to do on your drain field. And how to have a good drain field that's good for your drain field and your septic system and for the wildlife. And these are some great books. The two on the top, Living with Wildlife and Landscaping for Wildlife, they are done by Russell Link. He's a fish and wildlife biologist for Washington State. And they're specific for the Pacific Northwest. So they're excellent. They kind of tell you what to plant and how to handle critters that sometimes you think of as nuisances, but if you kind of work with them and know what their needs are, and so you don't create a nuisance opportunity for them, it's great for the Pacific Northwest. The bottom book is the National Wildlife Federation's book about wildlife habitats, and that's pretty good as well. So with that, thank you all who have certified as wildlife habitats on the island and being part of our vision of an island in harmony with nature, and 1 yard at a time, and we're working on some more, so please let people know and give the spiel. And with that, I will tell you about our speaker tonight. So first I stop share, and then I will look at this better. Okay, so Jane Billinghurst is our speaker tonight, and it's quite a good one. It's where we want to be right now, out in the forest in that cool lushness in the shade. And Jane is the author of the new book, Discovering the Trees, Woodlands of North America. And I can even show you it. I should have had that set up. So here's the book. It was in the library. Here's this pitch for Snow Isle. They didn't have this in an ebook, and I said, oh, I'd like that in an ebook. And so I recommended it, and a week later, I could get it from Snow Isle. So that's one place you can get it. And our library is pretty responsive. Back to Jane. Sorry, Jane, I ramble sometimes. So Jane wrote this book, and she's a co-author. She did this with Peter Wohlleben, and you may recognize him. He was the man who wrote The Hidden Life of Trees, which Jane translated. So Jane is a former book publisher, editor, and author of 6 books. She also has translated quite a few books for Peter, and now she's written this book. And this book is fabulous. She got to go to do all the work for this book. She went on a 4-month visit to the forests in North America. So that's a job I wouldn't mind. So tonight she's here to talk to us about the art of forest walking. And welcome, Jane. Thank you so much for doing the program for us tonight.
Thank you. I'm just going to get my screen up now. Whoops, back again. All right. Thank you all for coming. And I'm excited to share some of my forest experiences with you. I'd like to say that I'm not an expert. I wrote the book with Peter, which was a starting point for me to do my own journey of exploration into the forest. So I'm learning slowly in somewhat sedimentary geological fashion, immersing myself in knowledge, some of which settles and sticks, and some of which flows away. But it doesn't matter because I know the forest is out there, just waiting for me to learn more. All the photographs in this presentation are ones that I have taken in and around Fidalgo Island. And if you have any questions or observations of your own, please do put them in the chat. I'll leave a few minutes at the end to address them. And so let's step into the forest. When you step into a forest, you immerse yourself in the ecosystem the trees have created. The air is full of oxygen released by leaves and needles as trees make food out of air and sunshine. Trees alive and dead, aided by mosses, store water, which they then release to create the kinds of cool microclimates they enjoy. Dead wood slowly rots to return nutrients to the soil to sustain the next generation of trees, the ultimate slow release fertilizer. While you're out in the forest, you can eavesdrop as trees release chemicals into the air as they exchange scent messages. Some of these chemicals are antibacterial and antifungal. They are, after all, the tree's defense mechanisms. So the air really is cleaner in the forest. Under your feet, trees are exchanging messages and shuttling food to those in need via the fungal threads that crisscross the forest floor. It's a busy place out there. There's always something going on. The branch in the top right, by the way, is a western hemlock, one of the main species in our area. I snapped this photograph this spring at Dougal State Park at the north end of Whidbey Island. It shows tiny pink cones here that are starting out on branches where last year's cones are still hanging on. So hemlocks are shade tolerant, and they grow under the Douglas firs that dominate many of our forests here. When the Dougs age out and die, which can take 1,000 years or more, the hemlocks and the other dominant shade tolerant tree in our area, the western red cedar, will take over. But a few thoughts before we step into the forest and see what we can find. And the first has to do with really looking, not just glancing superficially, but slowing down and looking at the details. And this can be incredibly rewarding. So I live in Anacortes, right next to nearly 3,000 acres of forest land. Doug firs are growing everywhere in the forest. Doug firs are growing in my yard. There are cones all over the place, but it wasn't until I did a nature journaling class run by friends of the Anacortes Community Forest Lands. And one of the things I had to do was draw something. And I started to draw this Doug fir cone. That was the first time that I noticed the mouse tails in the cone, even though I'd been surrounded by these cones for decades. The story, and you may well know it, is that a long time ago, a forest fire swept through the forest and the mice needed to find sanctuary somewhere safe. And the Doug firs offered to take them in. And as you can see from the fir cone, the mice are still there to this day with their little back feet and tails sticking out of the cones. So if you look at the bark on the Doug fir to the right of this slide, you will see that the mice made a great choice. By the time Doug firs are about 40 years old, they get this really thick, craggy bark that helps protect them from fire. So that's one thing, really looking carefully. Another thing is that you often don't know what you're going to find if you don't know what's out there. So this story, I noticed a photograph of a leaf much like this on a social media account that I follow. And I thought, that's really amazing. That's beautiful. I have to find some of those and take photographs of them. I don't mind how long it takes me. I'm going to find them. I step out of my house. I step onto the trail, which is across the road. I walk about 20 feet. These leaves are everywhere. They've been there all the time that I've been walking in the forest, but because I didn't know they were there, I'd never really noticed them. So this is a Mahonia or Oregon grape, and it's covered in what's commonly called map fungus. So these black lines demarcate individual fungus. And these black dots are where the fungal spores are kept. And when they're ready to be released, these dots will open up and the spores will blow away. So you've got to look carefully. You've got to have maybe some idea of what it is that you might want to look for. And finally, bear in mind that the forest is a dynamic ecosystem. This means that even if you were to do nothing but walk the same trail every day, there would always be something new to see. As plants grow, windstorms cause lichen-covered branches to fall to the ground, and animals pass by. And even if nothing changed, there's so much to see that every time you walked, you'd notice something that you'd never noticed before. I give myself a challenge that every time I go out into the forest, and I go out into the forest almost every day, I want to find something new, something I've never seen in quite that way, or something that I've never seen before. And usually I'm successful. So let's take a look at some of the delights that are out in our forests. And I'd like to start with lichens. Now, if you followed Deborah's presentation last month, she talked about lichens and mosses. And you will remember that lichens are a combination of a fungus, which provides the physical structure, and an alga, which photosynthesizes to provide food. And once the partners have combined, they stay joined for life. And fungi that have chosen to live in a lichenized form can never go back to living on their own. So lichens come in three main forms. They have crustose lichens, like this one at the bottom. These crustose lichens are pretty firmly attached to whatever surface they're growing on, which could be wood, it could be rock. This one on the bottom here, pale green with pink spots, goes by the delightful common name of fairy bark. And apparently this fairy bark glows under UV light, which is something I need to check out because I haven't seen that for myself yet. In the middle, we have a fruticose lichen. Fruticose lichens are thread-like, like this usnea or beard lichen at the bottom. The long fungal threads of this usnea are stretchy, which I really love. And there are also fruticose lichens that have small funnels or stalks that stick up. And we'll check out some of those a bit later. And then we have foliose lichens, which are leafy in shape, and I'm quite entranced by their forms. So lots of animals use lichens as food, shelter, nesting materials, and thriving populations of lichens are indicative of good air quality. So I mentioned that lichen is a partnership between a fungus and an alga, and actually that's not quite true. The fungi that form pelt lichens, this is a pelt lichen, this flat kind of lichen that you find low down on the ground. These pelt lichens can either have one algal partner or two. This one is partnered with a green alga, which gives it the green color here, and with a blue-green alga or cyanobacterium, which is sequestered in these little blue spots. So what's special about the cyanobacteria as the third partner in this lichen is that cyanobacteria fix atmospheric nitrogen, turning it into a form that plants can use. You probably know that we have a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere, but plants can't take nitrogen directly from the atmosphere. It needs to be turned into nitrates or nitrites, which can be done through commercial processes that create fertilizers, which is done in the roots of alders. They have nitrogen fixing bacteria in their root nodules. Legumes also fix nitrogen, and here in the forest, cyanobacteria help lichens provide nitrogen, the nutrients that trees and many plants need to grow. And so they're very important as fertilizers in the forest. Here's another pelt lichen. This one is dark in color on the left. That's because it has no green algal partner. It's just partnering with the cyanobacterium, so that dark blue is coming through in the lichen, all through the lichen. Now these orange spots, these orange sections at the end, this is where the fungal spores are contained for the lichen. This, by the way, is called dogtooth lichen. You can probably see why. These are the little tooth bits. So once the spores are released into the air, it's just the fungal part of the lichen. So they need to find an algal partner out there before they can combine and create a new lichen. And here on the right, you can see the fine roots or sort of rootlets, the rhizines that these pelt lichens use to attach themselves to the substrate. You often find these in moss growing on rocky, bald rocky areas. And they're easiest to see in late winter when a lot of the forest is, there's less color, less greenery, less understory in the forest, and these lichens then really stand out. So Loberia is another nitrogen fixing lichen. In this case, the cyanobacteria is not as obvious because it's within the body of the lichen and obscured by the green algal partner. It looks a little bit like sturdy lettuce, and indeed its common name is lettuce lichen. It grows up high in old growth forests. As rain washes down over it, nitrogen is leached out. While it's on the trees, the bark grows tiny little rootlets into the lichen to get nitrogen directly from it. When the lichen falls onto the forest floor and starts to decompose, the nitrogen that it contains is available to the trees. It's been found that ancient Pacific Northwest forests rely heavily on this particular lichen for their fertilizer needs. If you think about it, a tree can't go out and move like an animal can to find more food and fertilizer. No one's coming in spreading fertilizer. So these fertilizing systems are very important. And these apothecia, these are where the spores of this particular lichen are held before they're released. So the lichens we've covered so far are quite large and easy to spot. And some days I just want to zero in on the minuscule, especially since I got my new clip-on lens for my iPhone. Just about all of these photographs are actually taken with my iPhone. So here are some of these lichens with stalks, the fruticose stalk lichens that I mentioned earlier. These ones are commonly called pixie cups. And the granular bits that you can see here contain a little bit of the fungal partner for the lichen and a little bit of the algal partner. So if these break off and spread, the lichen has both partners that it needs to grow, and it can immediately start creating a new lichen. To give you some sense of scale, here on the right is another stalk lichen. This one is often called lipstick lichen or British soldiers because of the red cap. The red cap, again, is where the spores are released from this lichen. And this is where I found it, at the base of a dug fir around Little Cranberry Lake in Anacortes. I often find these kind of cladonia lichens at the base of dug firs, not so much on western red cedars. Dug firs, especially if there's some moisture around. So as I mentioned in the introduction, trees are actively creating the kinds of conditions in which they like to grow best. So cool, moist microclimates. And one of their partners is in this endeavor is moss. Moss can hold up to 20 times its weight in water. And you may have heard that if you're lost in a forest, look for the moss. It'll be growing on the north side of the trees and you'll be able to find your way out. Well, if you've been here in the Pacific Northwest for any length of time, you'll realize that moss grows everywhere, or it seems to grow everywhere. It actually grows most where the water is collecting on a tree. So you often don't see them on tall, straight Douglas firs. In this case, this tree, this conifer has a bend in it, so the water is collecting and the moss is happily growing. One of the places where they grow here a lot is big leaf maples. Big leaf maples have the kind of cracks and crevices in their bark that are really good for moss to get a hold of it. One way, very rough way to tell if what you're looking at is a moss or a lichen is to decide if you'd like to stroke it. So if you would, that's probably a moss, but like any rule, this one also has its exceptions. So the moss can reproduce by breaking off bits, but they, like lichens, can also reproduce by means of spores. And here you can see the moss spore heads sticking out from the cushion of moss underneath. And the moss spore capsules are something else that I've been having fun taking a look at. They can be very varied in size, shape, and color. So here are 3 of them. This first one is at what is called the spear stage. You can see it's got a little cap on the end of the spore capsule. And then the cap falls off. This is a different species of moss to reveal the operculum or trapdoor, which is a series of little teeth around the end of the capsule. And then when it's a little more mature, these teeth open up and release the spores, as you can see happening on this one to the right. And then I found this gorgeous thing. These dark round spore capsules here on translucent glass needle stalks belong to a liverwort, which is similar to a moss, but a little different. And I won't go into that here because, to be honest, I don't know much about the distinction yet. But I went back a few days later after the spore capsules had opened, and this is what I found. So the capsule opens to reveal the brown fluffy spores. Then as the spores disperse, the outer capsule casing is left. And then when all the spores are gone, the casings look like tiny dark stars on the forest floor. So now from looking at a couple of specifics, I'd like to move on into one of the carefully calibrated relationships in the forest ecosystem, that of nutrient recycling. And it all starts with dead wood. It is said that a tree is worth more to the forest dead than alive. Standing snags provide nesting sites. I'm sure many of you might have heard pileated woodpeckers this spring as they were busy creating new cavities to raise their brood. And lots of birds in our forests nest in tree cavities, either natural ones or ones that have been made by woodpeckers and then vacated, including birds such as owls and wood ducks. And then fungi, insects, and other critters start working on the dead wood to release the nutrients so a new generation of trees can grow. These red-belted conchs decompose dead or dying wood. The moisture they exude, you can see it here, is called guttation. I don't think we're quite sure why the conchs do this, but it's thought to be related maybe to their growth phases. Here's another fungal decomposer, much more delicate and frilly than the conchs, which are quite sturdy. This is a turkey tail, or it could be a false turkey tail. I have a lot to learn about identifying fungi as well. So like the conchs, these more delicate polypores, they're called polypores, are also doing their bit to break down the wood to release the nutrients stored for future generations of trees to grow. It can take a downed, dug fir up to 600 years to decay completely. So that's a long time to be providing nutrients to the forest. So nurse logs, that is dead trees lying on the ground, they're not only releasing nutrients, they're also great places, and sometimes the only places in the forest for new trees to start to grow. The forest floor can be so covered in underbrush that it can be difficult for new trees to get a start. In the Hoh rainforest, where this photograph was taken, it's estimated that 70% of the white spruce get their start in life on a nurse log. They're closer to the light. Moisture is always available in the rotting wood, and nutrients are available from the rotting debris and from the other debris that accumulates here. So nature never plants in straight lines. If you do see a straight line of trees in our forests, there's a good chance that they got their start in life on a nurse log. So not all decomposers in our forests are fungi or bacteria. There are others hard at work turning the debris on the forest floor into smaller and smaller pieces. So I'd like to introduce you to a couple of the locals. And before I do, I'll mention that earthworms are not beneficial in our forests. They have their place, say in a garden, aerating soil, mixing nutrients in a soil. So they can be super important, but here in our Pacific Northwest forests, earthworms are detrimental because they decompose the debris too quickly. So valuable nutrients are lost and the humus layer thins out. That is the layer of dead and rotting debris on the forest floor that gives that nice spongy covering that collects moisture. It becomes too thin and it no longer protects the soil. And the reason that earthworms are not beneficial decomposers for our forest is because of the expansion of the glaciers south in the last ice age. And when the ice came down, the glaciers wiped out all the trees and all the earthworms. And as the glaciers retreated about 10,000 years ago, and the forests here regenerated, they evolved with their own set of decomposers, ones that decompose forest debris much more slowly, and that leave that nice springy layer of duff on the forest floor that makes it so pleasant to hike in our forests. So here's one of our forest-friendly decomposers, the yellow-spotted millipede. Centipedes are carnivores, millipedes are herbivores. The millipede's coloration is advertising that it's not worth attacking or eating. Yellow and black are universal warning colors, both for us and for the animal kingdom. Think yellow jackets or caution tape, or the signs we humans use for radioactive waste. And I have a pro tip for you here about millipedes. You can sex them by looking at their legs. They have 31 pairs of legs on 20 body segments, and on the male, one leg on the 7th segment is slightly shorter than the others. And this is the leg it uses to transfer sperm to the female. So now we come to one of my favorites, banana slugs. They are the second large, I think I'm on a mission to make everyone fall in love with banana slugs, but they are the second largest slug in the world. The largest is a sea slug that is up to 3 feet long, the black sea hare. So that makes the banana slug the world's largest terrestrial slug. They can grow to almost 10 inches long. I've seen big ones, but pretty sure I've never seen one quite as large as that. So I caught this one hoovering up some vegetation looking distinctly past its sell-by date at Silver Lake County Park up in Whatcom. Slugs and snails don't have teeth. Instead, they have what's known as a radula, which is basically a really raspy tongue. And that's why the slug damage on your lettuces takes the form of holes rasped out of the middle of the leaves rather than nibbles around the edge. And they also do this with mushrooms. They like to eat soft foods in the forest. Fungi are one of their favorites. And here you can see where a slug has basically licked out a hole in this mushroom, which was growing in front of my house, actually. You've probably seen banana slugs gliding along the forest floor, dragging an arrangement of debris from their rear ends. This is not slug poop. Slugs defecate from an opening up in their mantle near their heads. This is debris that has gotten stuck to the slug slime. Slime is expensive to produce and can be recycled. Debris is a drag and debris is also lunch. So every once in a while, a slug will stop to snack off its burdensome package and cut down on its need to make more slime from scratch. And this was a slug I found around Russell Lake this spring that was doing exactly that, so I could snap the photograph. So there's one more relationship in the forest ecosystem that I would like to introduce you to, and it's got to do with fungi. So fungi, unlike plants, cannot make their own food, and the majority of fungi eat plants. Some of them are actually carnivorous. Oyster mushrooms, for instance, actually paralyze and eat nematodes, tiny microscopic little worms that are everywhere in the world, but we'll leave the carnivorous mushrooms off to one side for the moment. So there are three main types of fungi in the forest. You have fungi that eat live wood and kill trees, and I'm not covering those at all in this presentation. And then you have fungi that eat dead wood and are part of the nutrient recycling in the forest, like the conchs and the turkey tails that I just showed you. And finally, there are fungi that need to keep trees alive because they siphon off some of the sugar the trees are producing for themselves when they photosynthesize. So the fungi that need their trees alive are called mycorrhizal fungi. And these are the fungi that form part of what has been called the wood wide web. And they help trees shuttle nutrients, water, and information from one tree to another. So the fungi exact a payment for their services in the form of some of the sugar that the trees are busy producing to fuel their growth. It's estimated that up to 1/3 of the sugar produced by trees goes to feed their fungal networks. So in essence, the fungi are extending the tree's own root systems, allowing them to reach more nutrients and water than they would be able to reach otherwise, and allowing them to pass food along to trees that may not be doing so well, perhaps because they're in the shade, and so they can't photosynthesize as efficiently. The trees also use this fungal network to warn each other of danger. So if the trees at the edge of the forest realize that drought is imminent, they can feel that the soil on the edge of the forest is drying out, they can send messages via the fungal network to trees within the forest and say, you know what, not a good year, dial down your water use. And those trees will dial down their water use, even though they are not yet experiencing the drought for themselves. And trees can do the same thing if they're being attacked by caterpillars, say. A tree that's being attacked by caterpillars can use the fungal network to send information to other trees to say, I'm getting eaten here. Maybe you'd like to pump some toxins and nasty tasting chemicals up into your leaves to discourage snacking by the caterpillars should they end up over in your neck of the woods. So here in the photograph on the left, we have a Russella mushroom, and this is the fruiting body of one of the fungi that needs trees alive. And you can think of the fruiting body of the fungus a bit like an apple on an apple tree. So the main part of the fungus, equivalent to the tree itself, are the fungal threads that are underground. And the fruiting part, the mushroom, is above ground to disperse the spores. Russella mushrooms are often connected with dug firs, also connected with this plant on the right. And this white life form is indeed a plant, not a fungus. It's called ghost pipe. It's actually in the blueberry family. Originally, at one time, it was green and it photosynthesized, but it figured out a better way of getting food. And so over time, it lost its chlorophyll and its ability to make food for itself, which means it can live in deep shade as it no longer needs light. But it has to get food from somewhere. And as it turns out, it helps itself to some of the sugar that the trees are giving to the fungi, in this case, the Russella. So the fungi and the trees have a beneficial relationship going on, and neither would do well without the other. And we don't know that the ghost pipe offers any benefits to either the tree or the fungus. That's still being investigated, which makes it a parasite. However, there seems to be enough sugar to go around that neither the tree nor the fungus minds. So ghost pipes are mycoheterotrophs. Heterotroph because they cannot make their own food, which is what heterotroph means. We are heterotrophs. And myco because they steal food from mushrooms. And a fun fact about the ghost pipe is that before they're pollinated, their heads hang down. And after they're pollinated, they hold them more upright. There are mycoheterotrophs in other plant families as well. Spotted coral root is just about finished blooming here in our local forests. It's at the seed pod stage right now. And it's a mycoheterotroph in the orchid family. Like the ghost pipe, it can grow in deep shade because it doesn't need to photosynthesize. And for that reason, like the ghost pipe, it is mostly dispensed with leaves. It gets sugar from the fungi that are being fed by the trees. And like the ghost pipe, coral root also associates with fungi in the Russellacea family. But different mycoheterotrophs associate with different types of fungi. They emerge from the forest floor before the fungi. And if you know the fungi they associate with, you can use them to tell which fungi you can expect to see later in the year. And some of them associate with edible fungi. So mushroom hunters who are in the know will look for these mycoheterotrophs first when they're trying to scout out good mushrooming locations. So now I'd like to take you on a brief tour of one of my other obsessions at the moment, slime molds. So slime molds are not slime and they're not molds. I'll tell you a little later what they are. They're found all over the world. They're not animals, they're not plants, and they're not fungi. They're lumped into a catch-all category of life called Protista. And the ones we find in our forests are plasmodial slime molds, single-celled organisms with multiple nuclei. So this single blob-like mass moves as it feeds on bacteria and algae in the forest. They're part of the forest recycling system. So you can see here on the left, this is evidence of the slime mold having traveled, trying to finding the bacteria and algae that it's eating. And then when it's finished eating and it decides it's time to reproduce, it goes to a slightly higher spot and forms a blob and then gets ready to produce spores. And by the way, while slime molds are eating, so fungi break down their food outside their bodies and then absorb it. Slime molds are more like us. They ingest their food first and then they digest it inside their bodies the way that we do. So this slime mold is kind of difficult to miss. Its common name is dog vomit or scrambled egg slime mold. This particular one was about the size of my fist. They're not small. And if you use wood chip mulch, you might well find this one in your yard. I know they're out at the moment. I found one just yesterday, not very far from my home at the beginning of a forest trail. So they're not harmful. Slime molds are not harmful or toxic. They disappear once they've spread their spores, and they need moisture, some moisture around to move, because they move in a kind of a pulsing motion. And to test if what you found is a slime mold or a fungus, you can touch it with your finger and see if it kind of dissolves into liquid. Some slime molds are great at solving spatial puzzles. There's a famous experiment where scientists in Japan laid out the stops of a Tokyo subway system, placing oat flakes at the stops and bright lights where there were obstacles where the trains would not be able to go. And then they let the slime mold get to work. Now, slime molds don't like bright light and they love to eat oats. Exactly why, I don't know. Not a lot of rolled oats in the forest, but there you go. They eat oats. So the slime molds in the lab, they went from oat flake to oat flake, avoiding the bright areas. And when the slime mold was done, finding the most efficient way from A to B around the obstacles, the researchers ended up with a pattern very much like the transportation grid developed by human engineers. And slime molds are also used for things like determining efficient routes to fire escapes in a building. And they're so efficient at solving these spatial puzzles, some are bred for this specific purpose. One was even used to map out the best way to go around an IKEA store, which I think was amazing, because one time when my kids were in university, I went the wrong way around the IKEA store with a large cart full of furniture, and I can tell you it was a nightmare. I certainly would have enjoyed having a slime mold guide on that particular occasion. Slime molds are also fascinating because they radically change shape and color as they grow. So here are some tubular fruiting bodies of what is known as chocolate slime mold. Not chocolate at this point, but I'll show you pictures where they are. And this slime in this picture here on the right is not slime from the slug that's snacking on the slime mold. This is slime left from the slime mold as it was moving before it aggregated to create its fruiting bodies. So the next stage after these tubes in this chocolate slime mold is that the tubes darken in color and they turn powdery as spores are released. And then at that stage, there are beetles with spoon-shaped mandibles, all the better to scoop up the slime mold spores and stuff them in their mouths. So I'd like to take you through a process with a chocolate slime mold that I found in Washington Park in Anacortes earlier this year. So here you have a hole in the rotting log. The slime mold was inside the log. It crawled out, and you can see this slimy little path left by it when it crawled out. And once it had reached this higher elevation, it decided it was time to create its spores. So it started by creating this mass of what almost looks like frog's eggs or something like that. So this is day one. Now, I wasn't quite quick enough because the morning of the next day, it would have created those tubular fruiting heads that I just showed you in white and in yellow, but I missed that stage. I wasn't fast enough. This slime mold changes really quickly. So those long tubes have already turned the dark chocolate color that gives this slime mold its name. And here you can see one of those little beetles has come to check it out. It's going yum, yum, yum. I'm pretty excited about what's going to happen next. These tubes then turn into these powdery spores. So the tubes are going to disappear completely. But before they do, this little beetle is going to have a go at stuffing some of these spores into its mouth. So cool. This beetle is so small, I couldn't see it with my naked eye. I could only see it when I had the macro lens on. So this particular log has been a fruitful one for me with slime molds. And here's a couple of other ones I saw in a previous year. Again, you can see these sort of eyelash stalks and these lovely fruiting bodies at the top. And then they mature, they create the spores. And as you can see, there is this little arthropod checking out the action. So arthropod is a broad term that includes any number of tiny critters that are scuttling around the forest floor. Again, this is something I would not see with my naked eye. I could only see under the magnification of my lens. So there's an arthropod specialist called Andrew Moldenke who works in Oregon forests. And he says that by examining the arthropod community in a soil sample, he can tell what time of year the sample was taken, whether the slope was north or south facing, what the understory of plants were, what the successional stage of the forest was, and what trees were growing in the vicinity. So much information from such tiny critters. So I'm not sure we can get much smaller than this. So this seems like a good place to end the presentation. And my talk is not based on the book exactly, but it illustrates the journey that I took after working with Peter and deciding what aspects of the forest that I wanted to investigate further. The book was a jumping off point for me. And Peter and I hope that it will be a jumping off point for many readers as they decide what kind of personal forest journeys they would like to have. If you like my photographs, you can follow me on Instagram if Instagram is something that you do, Jane_Billinghurst_writer. And if you want to get some ideas about the kind of forest journeys you could make, the book will have some for you. So that is the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions, I would be most happy to answer them. I'm going to stop screen sharing now. So let's see. Oh, the leopard slug. Oh, well, the leopard slug actually is not the banana slug. The leopard slug is the fastest slug that we have, and it will hunt down and eat other slugs. So no, I'm going to stick with the banana slug as my favorite, not the leopard slug. So we have no other questions at the moment, but if you want to unmute and ask any, or maybe make comments about things you've been seeing in the forest recently, that would be great too.
Jane, I've been curious. I was really thrilled about the slime molds. I've seen them, but I didn't know what they were. So tell us about what we're seeing in wood chips, because I've seen a lot of different things. Are they all slime molds, or are they different, all kinds of different things?
Fungi growing in wood chips as well. So I wouldn't know without looking at it. Always check them out by poking them with your finger. If it's a fungus, it will be firm. It will just stay there. If it is a slime mold, it will disintegrate. Not all of them disintegrate into watery stuff. Some of them do. Some of them you can poke and then they've got sort of a toothpastey goo that comes out of them. Wolf's milk slime mold is one of those. But wolf's milk is little pink blobs, almost look like the tops of mushrooms. There's something called a false puffball, which is also a slime mold.
Sure.
Vomit is yellow. Tapioca slime mold is white. There's a beautiful one called coral slime mold, which almost looks like coral and undersea coral, which is lovely. I like chocolate slime mold because it changes so quickly from to those beautiful stalks to, chocolate ganache to cocoa powder to it's just gone. So raspberry slime mold is bright red. They are fascinating. They come in all different forms, and people do the most amazing macro photography of individual spore heads that are almost iridescent. They're just beautiful.
Wow. So would you look on the internet, or are there books? What would be a reference for slime molds?
Internet is good. There is if you do Facebook, there's a slime mold identification and appreciation group, which is really very good. There aren't that many books. Slime molds are interesting, and they are around the world, and they don't seem to have territory in the same way that animals do. So the slime molds that you find in Tasmania, you can also find in North America. They're quite widespread. But because, it's a little bit of a niche area, there are some books, but not a great deal of books. You do better checking out on the internet to see the photographs.
Cool. Other questions? Go ahead.
Do you have some tips on finding them? Like if I'm walking in the forest, I just go slowly and look on a tree or a log.
Yeah, I look for a downed log, probably mostly a deciduous log on the forest floor, but some of them are tiny, absolutely tiny. And so it's almost like little dots, and you've really got to look closely. They can be massed together. There's one really cool one I found up near Chuckanut, and it starts off as bright yellow, and then it develops into sort of purple clusters that look like grapes that hang down. Now, dog vomit's easy to find because it's quite large and it's bright yellow, so it kind of stops you in your tracks. Coral's quite easy to find too. It's because it's so white, and really it kind of might look like just a white line on dead wood at first, but if you look up closely, you can begin to, and especially if you have a magnifying loupe, you can begin to see the definition of the individual branches of the slime mold.
Wow. Does anything eat them?
Well, you saw the slug eating them.
Right. Okay.
You saw the beetle eating them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But little things, it's not something like a bear would come along and eat slime molds.
No.
Mostly little things.
Mostly small, as far as I know. Mostly small things eat them. Yeah, they're soft and gooey, so slugs like soft gooey stuff.
Yeah.
Beetles like the spores.
Okay. Very cool. Other questions?
Yes. Are there some favorite forests you would suggest we go to for the overall forest experience?
Every forest is different, which is what I find fascinating. Like when I give forest walks in Anacortes, I'm pointing out very different things from when I'm giving forest walks in Bellingham. They have a lot of Western red cedars up there that we don't have down here. I mean, personally, I love the redwoods. The coastal redwoods are great, but every forest will have something and will have a different composition. And it's really cool to get to know them individually and see what a difference the climate, the location, the kinds of trees they have makes for how the forest feels, how it smells, how it sounds. My favorite forests are just ones I get to know in a lot of detail, ones that I can visit over and over again, because then I'm aware of the changes. Sometimes even different walking the trail in one direction and back, or walking the trail in the morning is against walking a trail in the evening. And now that I've got a trail I go around fairly regularly, I can now see how it changes over the seasons and what I'm likely to see. Like earlier on in the year, the turkey tails were stunning, so beautiful, such bright colors. Now that it's hotter, they're still there, but the colors are much more muted. So some things really jump out at you in some seasons. And then of course, there's the beautiful wildflowers that you have in some bold openings, clearings in forests that are now just beginning to go over. Ghost pipes are beginning to grow. Coral roots have just finished. So there's always something going on, and it's kind of cool to get to know what happens in your forest at any one particular time. So not only is every forest different, but every individual forest is different at different times of the year. And then of course there's the animals that are in the forest as well, which in our case are mostly coyotes and great horned owls and barred owls and dragonflies and salamanders and little lizards and stuff like that.
Are you leading any walks soon?
No, not locally. I will be doing some walks, but they're up on Vancouver Island. I don't have any planned in the local area at the moment.
Okay.
I did some ones earlier in the spring, but not right now.
Your bio said that you have been in the Anacortes area and walking the forest there for 20 years. So have you noticed changes, climate change type of changes?
We are noticing in the community forest lands in Anacortes that teenage hemlock trees seem to be struggling at the moment, which we assume has to do with drought. We got local volunteers who are tracking the water in the forest and also going out and monitoring what's happening at different times of year. But the mature hemlocks seem fine. They have extensive root systems. The little baby hemlocks seem fine. It's not a big tree to get water to, but the teenage ones, the sort of, I don't know how big they would be, maybe 20 foot or something like that. They go in a little brown in some places of the forest. But again, it depends on the aspect of the slope and how close they are to any of the beaver ponds and stuff like that. But yes, that is one thing that we're actively monitoring at the moment. I mean, the general consensus or thought is that as the climate changes, trees will begin to migrate up further north. And then the debate is, do you help the trees or do you allow the trees to do this on their own? So years ago, when that ice, thousands of years ago, when the ice sheet came down, even though it only covered northern Washington and sort of northern Minnesota and northern Ontario, the cold front in front of that ice sheet went all the way down the United States. So Douglas firs moved southward and ended up on the Mexico border. And then when the ice sheets went back, receded north, some of those Doug firs were left behind. And they're a refugia of Doug firs in Big Bend National Park in Texas, in sheltered valleys where up high in the Chisos Mountains where it stays cool. So trees are perfectly capable of moving if the climate changes slowly. One of the problems, well, we have the problem that the climate is changing quite quickly. We also have the problem that we have divided up the land. And so, you know, if you get a Doug fir growing in the middle of your lawn, you probably take it out. And so the trees are not free to move in the way that they were in the past because of the way that we use the land, and we have cities and roads and people's backyards all getting in the way of a natural migration of trees.
How far horizontally and deep do these tree roots go? And is there a difference between species?
There's definitely a difference between species. I don't have any specific information for you, but it really will depend on the soil depth. Like a lot of our forests, it's quite rocky soil, and the conifers in particular have very flat root systems, which is one reason why we get wind throw. In winter storms, if there's been a lot of rainfall, the ground what soil there is gets very soggy. And so the trees are not as well anchored, and then a stiff wind can blow them over. And you see these huge root plates in the forest. It's all part of a natural forest progression. I mean, forests do this, open up light spaces, which allows new trees to get a start in life when the light floods into that clearing area. One of the ways that you can tell if you have an undisturbed ancient forest is that the forest floor will be full of hillocks and mounds. So you'll have depressions where the roots used to be. You'll have a mound where the roots are there and decomposing. So this kind of lumpy landscape is very natural. Trees blowing down is also quite natural, and the way that the forest maintains a succession and a variety of trees of different ages. So tree roots tend to go out more than they go down, and they go out way farther than you tend to think. There's a really nice illustration of this in an arboretum in Pennsylvania, I think, where they've got the tree and then there's an asphalt path that's some way away from the tree, and they actually have drawn in on that path the tree roots, and you can see they give you a visual idea of how far out they're coming from the tree. So the roots just don't go to the drip line of the tree. They tend to go way further than that. And other than trees that have tap roots, like maybe walnuts or something like that, they tend to be quite close. A lot of them are quite close to the surface.
Cool. Do you have plans for another book?
I work with Peter to translate. So Peter has another book that's coming out that I translated. It's coming out in the spring. It's called The Promise of Trees. It talks about how trees learn, how they pass information down to their offspring, and why in times of climate change, it's important to keep undisturbed forests and ancient trees, because over the years, they've lived through many different changes in climate and have stored up all this knowledge and memory that they can then pass on to their offspring, which say, if you cut them all down and planted new trees, they would not have had that experience and would not have had to adapt to these climate changes. So you lose something that you can never get back when you take a big old tree down.
Other questions?
Well, thank you. So go out into the forest, see something you've never seen before, and decide how you want to enjoy a forest. Maybe you don't want to go into it in the depth that I have. Maybe you just want to see pretty patterns. Maybe you just want to sit and smell the smells. Maybe you just want to hear what it sounds like early in the morning. But if you really kind of immerse yourself into it, and it's not that far away from you, a whole new world can be opened up.
Thank you very much, Jane. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Jane. Thank you all. And there will be many kudos in the chat about your program, Jane.
Yeah.
So well appreciated. Thank you.
Do get the book. There's a lot of it. I love the footnotes at the end too. There's a lot of references for new things.
But this is not an illustrated book. There are a couple of illustrations of mine, photographs of mine scattered throughout. But after I gave this presentation at one time, someone thought that it was going to be a glossy coffee table book. It is not a glossy coffee table book. It is giving you an idea of how you might create your own forest adventure. And my presentation is a result of the forest adventure I have created for myself after reading this book. And with Backyard Wildlife Habitat, you can, of course, bring some of the forest into your own yard. So you only have to step outside the door to see some of these amazing things.
How true. All right. Well, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Bye.